Okay, I am going to try to see if we can figure out how to use Zoom. As you may have known or heard, we have been experiencing a rash of coronavirus. And so I'm going to try to do something I'm not really good at, and that is to try to merge some teaching and put that together in an online format using Zoom, which I've never used before, and I'm going to use this as sort of a test case. So I'm just going to do a short video and see how that works. So what I'm trying to do, and hopefully what you're seeing, is I'm trying to record a video. I am trying to show a PowerPoint and also have, in case you, for whatever reason, want to see my face, you can. I do have a very nice beard, so I guess that's what we've got. What I'm going to start by sharing is what I've done in the middle of a Bible class I'm teaching in a church context, and that is that we're in the middle of studying First and Second Kings. The books of First and Second Kings often get the short shrift. I feel like in our Bible study, at least among the tradition wherein I teach, we study the book of Acts about 1,000,000 times in a year, and then maybe we'll hit things like First Corinthians, or we'll do Genesis, 1 through 11. Sometimes we'll hit Abraham and some of the patriarchs. But once we pass David, and definitely once we pass Solomon, the knowledge and the time that we devote to the kings is significantly lower. So I'm teaching through a class then on First and Second Kings, and the way that I've decided to put it together is to look at not just the specific historical and linguistic and archaeological aspects of the book, which are there, and really fascinating sort of thing, and really that's more of my training and what I'm interested in. Oh, but I'm also trying to discuss some of these more literary and thematic studies that get seen through the books. And that's why I've chosen to call the class No King Like David. One thing that you'll notice is if you read through the books in First and Second Kings is that there's really two paths, two characters who, although are barely in the book, they're specters, they're legacies. Haunt the rest of the action. And the first king is the first king of the United Kingdom in the south, from the family of David, and that is David. We're going to read about David. No king like David. Followed the path of David. Walked in the steps of David. Did not walk in the steps of David. For every king in the south, they're held up to the standard of David. Now in the north, or the opposite king of that, is going to be represented by Jeroboam, and the sin of Jeroboam that we're going to read over and over and over and over again. The golden calves present at Dan on Bethel haunts that story. And characters kind of fall into one of these two archetypes, or these two paradigms. So, for example, Jeroboam is like a pharaoh who imprisons his people. And he becomes that even though he began as sort of a Moses character who is attempting to get away from Solomon, right? Who's held up as a pharaoh figure. Later, after Jeroboam, then we get the character of, or the personage, if you prefer that terminology, of Ahab. And Ahab's Baalism then in some ways takes the place for a little while of Jeroboam's golden calves. And so that's kind of where we're at in the story. And we've just finished off the major section, although we're going to see him again, the major section of the two prophets, Elijah and Elisha, and their focus and their interest and their interactions with the Omrides, Omri and Ahab and his sons. And we're just now, having seen Jehu's purge, transitioning and going back then to the south. And that's what we're going to pick up there in 2 Kings chapter 11, is in the south indeed. And let's see if I can make the situation move forward. All right, there we go. So what's going on then in this situation is we're moving towards the place and the time of southern Judah, which is distinct from and really weaker than Israel at this point in time. And we're going to read about what exactly is going on there then in 2 Kings chapter 11. So we read that now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she rose and destroyed all of the royal family. Now, who's this Athaliah, right? If we're just jumping back into the story, we may not remember. And so I've put up a timeline here, or not really a timeline. It's a family tree, as it were. And it shows you kind of what's happened. And that is that we have first this alliance, this marriage alliance between the Omri line, particularly here, it's going to be Ahab's daughter. And David's line, who is going to be Jehoshaphat. Now, Jehoshaphat is a good king. Jehoshaphat, we're going to see, is largely a very good king, one of the better kings that we have in the South. But, and this is going to be a big but, we'll see in just one second, what he's done is an attempt to gain power, particularly at this point in time, to try to counteract the power of Syria under Ben-Hadad or Hazael in the north, who's a main opponent of Israel and Judah, is he is teamed up with, although as an inferior partner, with Israel. And what happens is you enter marriage alliances. That's how you do things in the ancient world. And so they make a marriage alliance, and he marries off, as you can see. Ahab marries off his daughter Athaliah to Jehoshaphat's son, Jehoram. And Jehoram is going to ascend to the throne for just a short period of time. And Jehoram is going to act very much like he is initiating a coup. See, what happens is normally, if you're kind of ascending to the throne following the same family tree, you don't do what he's about to do. And that is he wipes out all of his rivals. He kills off all of his brothers. And we see already this kind of situation like what we saw with Omri, that he's acting more like a child of Ahab than he is as a child of David. Well, he ends up dying of disease, right? And we have then his son, Ahaziah, who rules for 1 year. Now, he rules for 1 year. He's going to visit his uncle, Ahaziah, in the north, or Joram in the north. Not confusing at all, right? You've got Jehoram, Joram, Ahaziah, Ahaziah. But he's killed off by Jehu, and Jehu's purged in 2 Kings chapter 9. Now, he gets buried. But what we have here then is a new situation. Who is going to be king? He was relatively young. He does not have any grown sons. And we have this question about the legacy. Now, hopefully that slide is still showing up here. As we have a legacy played out then between Jehoshaphat. What's a legacy? Well, what I mean by that is, what does he leave behind? Because we read, on the one hand, that he does mostly what his father David did. See, there's David's specter again, kind of present behind the scenes. And he doesn't do what the Amorites do. He doesn't do what particularly Ahab does through his influence with Jezebel and that marriage alliance that he has with Phoenicia, who's also trying to counteract the powers of Syria. He doesn't bring in Baalism into Judah like it's been brought into Israel. He does establish peace and justice throughout the land, which is the most important aspect of what a king is supposed to do. But, right? And you can kind of hear that but coming up, and that but is that he does not remove the high places. Now, there's a whole big thing going on with the high places. We're only reading 2 kings. They're going to be later on, Hezekiah and Josiah, who are going to remove the high places. But these high places in the narrative of kings are functioning as kind of a representative of the 2 high places for Dan and Bethel, even though they're not exactly the same. He's made this alliance with Ahab that we've already talked. He allies with Ahab's son Joram, which ends in disaster as well. And he allies himself with Ahaziah, the other son of Ahab. And because of this alliance, we're going to see there are dramatic consequences for his family line. The first one we've already mentioned, which is when his son kills off all of his other sons, even though they're supposed to rule together. And now we have this other situation, which is what's going on with Athaliah, who is Ahab's daughter, who is married then to his son, but now she's a widow, and her main son has died, and she has a question. Now when Athaliah, this is 2 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and she destroyed all the royal family. But Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Joram, the sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being put to death, and she put him to death. Put him and his nurse in a bedroom. So they hid him from Athaliah so that he was not put to death. And he remained with her for 6 years, hidden in the house of the Lord, while Athaliah reigned over the land. Now we're going to see that this chapter is going to be driven by Athaliah's senses. She's going to see something, and then later she's going to hear something, and we're going to see how that plays off in the situation. Now, Athaliah, as a mother, is playing off of this continual situation in the book of Kings where mothers are not good at all, right? Like if you have a story and there's a mother, almost always we are primed for this to be a bad story. Okay. Now there are some noticeable exceptions, but think about that. We read in very beginning, right? The story of Solomon is that you've got these two mothers, these two prostitutes, and one kills her son in an accident, but steals the son of the other and is fine with him getting chopped in half. Right? That's one of these mothers. Or we read in 2 Kings chapter 6 during the siege, the two mothers again conspire and they kill and eat one of their sons one day, and then they're going to kill and eat this other son the next day. That's, again, not a good mother. Or that we've seen that mothers, and this is, of course, a noticeable, it's kind of a problem here that some people don't like to notice, but in the very beginning in Solomon's reign, the mother of Bathsheba conspires to get her son's half-brother killed, right? She conspires to get Adonijah killed off so that he doesn't have the situation. And part of this is playing off is that the book of Kings is not just a historical book, it's also really more of a prophetic book. That's where it's placed in the Hebrew arrangement, right? The Masoretic text places in the Nevi'im, the prophets, and it's really more of a prophetic book in a lot of ways. And the prophets talk about mothers devouring their children, and Israel as that sort of a mother, that she's going to destroy her own children for her own gain. We hear a lot about, and for good reason, toxic masculinity. And if you're going to read the book of Judges, it's really where you get that. But in the book of Kings, it's not just toxic masculinity. We're going to see this toxic femininity as well. More mentions than anywhere else of these queen mothers, like here we have of Athaliah. They have a lot of power, enormous influence in these sorts of situations. And she goes and she wipes off many children. She destroys most of the royal family. She says, why not me? If someone's going to rule, why not me? Her mother Jezebel, we see, has a lot of power as queen mother in Israel this time, and maybe that's influencing her decisions. But we know Jehoshaphat, who is the daughter of King Joram and the sister of Ahaziah, here, perhaps a rival in many ways to Athaliah, that she kind of reenacts the Exodus, right? That she takes under where all these boys are being killed, and she takes and she hides him, not in just her own house like Moses' mother does when Pharaoh is trying to kill off all the boys, but she hides them in the temple. And this is going to be a really crucial note of what's going on in this situation. She rescues the son, she gets him a nurse, she remains in the temple for 6 years while Athaliah reigns. Then we have a situation, right? We're going to have the 7th year is going to occur. But in the 7th year, and this is 2 Kings chapter 11, verses 4 and following. In the 7th year, Jehoiada sent and brought the captains of the Kerites of the guards and had them, pardon me, and had him made a covenant with them and put them under oath in the house of the Lord. And he showed them the king's son. And he commanded, say, this is the thing that you should do. 1/3 of you, when you come off of duty for the Sabbath, you guard the king's house. Another third at the gate of Sur, and the third at the gate behind the guards was guard the palace. Now, 2 divisions of you, when you come on duty in force on the Sabbath and guard the house of the Lord on behalf of the king, shall surround the king, each with his weapons in his hand, and whoever approaches the ranks is to be put to death. So be with the king when he goes out, when he comes in. And the captains did exactly what Jehoiada the priest commanded. And they brought their men who were about to go off duty on the Sabbath, and those who were about to do duty on the Sabbath and came to Jehoiada the priest. And the priest gave in to the captains the spears and the shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of the Lord. And the guards stood, each man with his weapons in his hand, from the south side to the house, to the north side of the house, around the altar and the temple, the house on behalf of the king. And he brought out the king's son, and he put the crown on him. He gave him the testimony, and they proclaimed him king and anointed him. And they clapped their hands and said, long live the king. This is a coup attempt, right? That what's happened is we read that there's this king and there's this priest. We're going to read about him being a priest, not immediately first, but his name is Jehoiada. And Jehoiada is a loyalist. He's the first named or significant priest to show up since the time of Solomon, when we read the last time we had a named priest of such importance like this. And he also was bringing about a coup or a counter coup, depending on how you want to read that text. And here he brings the captain of the mercenary troops, these Carians. These are the same words really as the Cherethites. These are Cretan mercenary warriors. Okay, Crete is well known for its warriors in antiquity. And he makes a covenant with them, and he shows them Joash. Now, why does he wait 7 years? I don't know. Maybe he's waiting to see what happens with Athaliah's reign. Maybe he's waiting for him to be old enough to show family resemblance. I don't know. But normally what we have is these guards had to leave their weapons at their guard stations to stop a coup attempt. But he's in control of the temple, and the temple has weapons there, right? We read all about the shields and the swords and everything that a lot of times are looted and sold for other things. But this is a Davidic revolution because these shields and swords and spears and everything they're using, they're modeled on those things that David had dedicated to the temple. So we have then this situation that's tying into all of these other stories. Now, when Athaliah hears, right, and here's the second situation about where Athaliah's senses are driving the story, is that all of this has happened, but she doesn't know about it until finally we read, now Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and the people, and she went into the house of the Lord to the people, and when she looked, there was the king standing by the pillar according to the custom, and the captains and the trumpeters beside the king, and all the people of the land rejoicing and blowing trumpets. And Athaliah tore her clothes, and she cried, treason, treason! And then Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains who were set over the army, bring her out between the ranks and put her to death with the sword, anyone who follows her. But the priest said, let her not be put to death in the house of the Lord. So they laid hands on her, and she went through the horse's entrance to the king's house. And there she was put to death. So she hears of this coup attempt just as Adonijah in the beginning of Kings hears of a coup attempt. And she sees the king by the pillar, this Bathsheba in the temple, and everyone's shouting, long live the king. And she calls out treason, but no one's listening. They've already got the guards. They've cut off her own supporters. There's no one there to do anything. They've quashed this rebellion before anything else has happened. And they drag her outside of the temple. This is going to be important later in the book of Kings and later in Joash's story. But they drag her outside of the temple and they put her to death. And just as the guards have made a covenant, now Jehoiada the priest, right? Because the king's young. The king doesn't have agency yet. There's no stories really of children with agency in the Bible. Jehoiada makes a covenant, and what we have is a situation where he makes a covenant between the king and the Lord and the people, right? So, and Jehoiada made a covenant with the Lord and with the king and the people that they should be the Lord's people, and also between the king and his people. And all the people of the land went to the house of Baal and they tore it down. His altars and his images they broke in pieces, and they killed Matan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. And the priest posted watchmen over the house of the Lord, and he took the captains, the Karites, the guards, and the people of the land, and they brought the king down from the house of the Lord, marching through the gates of the guards to the king's house, and they took his seat on the throne of the kings, and all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet after Athaliah had been put to death with a sword at the king's house. And Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. Now here we have these interesting kind of backstories because we see that Ahab's influence has infiltrated, that he's brought Baalism, that Athaliah has brought Baalism into Jerusalem, into Judah, into this situation. And what they do is kind of like, in some ways, what Jehu has done in the previous chapters. They're going to destroy a temple. They're going to tear down the Baal images. They're going to kill the priests of Baal. But it's different in some ways than what Jehu did, right? They both destroy the temple and both do those sorts of things, but Jehu also destroys all the Baal worshipers. He makes sure they have the right clothes and outfits. And whereas in the north, it's a prophet who drives this. In the south, it's a priest. And in the north, it's the king, but here it's Jehoiada. And in neither place do we have the high places removed. And the mercenaries then escort the king through the throne, and the people rejoice, and the city doesn't rebel. That's what this whole peace and quiet is they're, for whatever reason, fine to get rid of her. And we read this note that he's 7 years when he begins to reign. And narratively in the book of Kings, this coup attempt, this rebellion, is really as good as it gets. It's a combination of a priest and a king like David, even if it's not a prophet. And the form is going to be based in notes right there, right in Moses' covenant and in David's covenant. And this is where we have hope. But if you've been reading the book of Kings very long, then you realize that anytime you have this hope bloom, is this going to be a king like David? Is this going to be a prophet like Moses? Then you know it's going to be immediately squashed. Because the whole point of the book of Kings is that there's no king like David. There's no prophet like Moses. And you don't have to have a Christological reading of the book of Kings to notice that this is a very messianic text. Because as it's setting up these kings and as these prophets, it's part of this thing called the Deuteronomistic history. And it's all looking back to or embracing the ideology of what we've seen in Deuteronomy. And the Deuteronomy says, look, the Lord's eventually going to raise up another prophet for you like Moses. And time and time and time and time again in the book of Kings, we're thinking, is this going to be him? Is this going to be the prophet like Moses? And time and time and time again, we realize it's not. It's not. So I just want to do a short thing to try to introduce this. I have no clue if it's actually been recording. We're about to find out. And I'm hoping then that it does, and that this has been useful, and that we get something useful out of this. So let's see then if it works. So